The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training facility as General Marcus Richardson stepped out of his armored vehicle. The dust kicked up by the convoy settled slowly in the desert air, and he could already hear the distinctive crack of rifle fire echoing from the shooting range. Today was different from his usual inspections. Today, he was here to evaluate a new sniper who had been causing quite a stir among the ranks. Sarah Chen had arrived at the base 3 weeks ago, transferred from a classified overseas operation that nobody seemed willing to discuss. The paperwork was clean, her credentials impeccable, but there was something about her file that made the general uneasy. Too many redacted sections, too many missing details. What bothered him most was that her previous commanding officers spoke of her in hushed tones, with a mixture of respect and something that looked almost like fear. As he approached the shooting range, General Richardson could see a small crowd of soldiers gathered around one of the firing positions. This was unusual. Typically, sniper training was a solitary affair, conducted under strict supervision with minimal observers. The fact that word had spread enough to draw a crowd suggested something extraordinary was happening. Master Sergeant Davis, the range instructor, spotted the general's approach and quickly jogged over, his face showing a mixture of excitement and confusion. "Sir, you need to see this. I've been training snipers for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like what she's doing." The general nodded but said nothing, preferring to observe first and ask questions later. As they walked toward the crowd, he could see a figure lying prone behind a massive rifle. Even from a distance, he could tell this wasn't standard issue equipment. The weapon was easily 5 feet long, with a scope that looked like it belonged on a telescope rather than a rifle. Sarah Chen lay perfectly still behind the CheyTac M200 intervention, a rifle system designed for extreme long-range precision shooting. The weapon was capable of effective kills beyond 2 kilometers, but few shooters had the skill to utilize its full potential. Her position was textbook perfect, body aligned, breathing controlled, eye relief optimal behind the scope. But there was something else, an almost supernatural stillness that seemed to radiate from her entire being. "What's the target distance?" General Richardson asked quietly. 2,000 meters, sir, Sergeant Davis replied. "She's been hitting center mass consistently for the past hour." But that's not the remarkable part. Before the general could ask what was remarkable, the rifle barked. The sound was thunderous, even with hearing protection. Through his binoculars, he watched the spotting scope operator call out the hit, another perfect center mass shot. The soldiers around him murmured appreciatively, but Sarah Chen's expression remained unchanged. She worked the bolt smoothly, chambered another round, and settled back into position. "She's using hand-loaded ammunition," Sergeant Davis continued. "Calculated the ballistics herself, adjusted for wind, temperature, humidity, even barometric pressure. But here's what's really getting everyone's attention, she's doing it without a spotter." This caught the general's attention immediately. Long-range precision shooting was typically a 2-person operation. The spotter would calculate environmental factors, call wind direction and speed, and help the shooter adjust for various conditions. For someone to consistently hit targets at extreme range without assistance was nearly unheard of. As if reading his thoughts, Sarah Chen began making minute adjustments to her scope. Her movements were precise, economical, showing no wasted motion. She had been studying the wind flags placed at various distances downrange, calculating wind speed and direction changes that would affect the bullet's flight path over the 3-second journey to the target. General Richardson found himself studying the woman behind the rifle as much as her shooting. She appeared to be in her late 20s, of average build, with black hair pulled back in a regulation ponytail. There was nothing physically imposing about her, nothing that would suggest she was capable of the precision shooting he was witnessing. But there was something in her eyes, visible even from his position, that spoke of experiences far beyond her apparent age. "How long has she been at this today?" he asked. "Since 0500, sir. Nearly 4 hours without a break. She's fired over 60 rounds, and I haven't seen her miss once." The general checked his watch. It was approaching 9 in the morning, which meant she had begun shooting before sunrise, probably adjusting for changing light conditions as the sun came up. This level of dedication and consistency suggested either obsessive perfectionism or someone who had learned that missing wasn't an option. Another shot rang out, followed immediately by the spotter's confirmation of another hit. The general noticed that Sarah Chen was now making adjustments to her scope between each shot, compensating for the gradually increasing wind speed as the desert began to heat up. She seemed to anticipate the environmental changes before they fully manifested. "Has anyone spoken with her about her background?" General Richardson asked. Sergeant Davis shifted uncomfortably. "We've tried, sir. She's polite, follows orders perfectly, but she doesn't volunteer information. When directly asked about her experience, she just says she learned overseas. The few details we've gotten suggest she was involved in some pretty intense situations." The crowd began to disperse as the morning training schedule demanded attention elsewhere, but the general remained. He was transfixed by the methodical precision of Sarah Chen's shooting. Each shot followed the same ritual: study the conditions, make microscopic scope adjustments, control breathing, fire, observe the result, repeat. There was no celebration of successful shots, no frustration with the few that landed slightly off-center. As the range emptied, Sarah Chen finally looked up from her rifle. For the first time, she seemed to notice she had been observed. Her eyes met General Richardson's across the range, and he saw something there that made him understand why her previous commanders spoke of her with such complex emotions. There was competence, certainly, but also a weight that suggested she had used her skills in ways that went far beyond training targets. She began the process of securing her weapon, movements still precise and economical. Everything was done by the book, but with an efficiency that spoke of countless repetitions under possibly less ideal circumstances. General Richardson approached as she finished packing her equipment. Up close, he could see details that hadn't been visible from a distance. Her hands showed small scars consistent with fieldwork. Her boots were well maintained but showed wear patterns suggesting extensive time in rough terrain. Most telling were her eyes, alert, constantly scanning, never quite relaxing even in this controlled environment. "Impressive shooting, soldier," he said simply. "Thank you, sir," she replied. Her voice was calm, professional, giving away nothing beyond basic military courtesy. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "Overseas, sir. Various locations over the past several years." The general waited, hoping she would elaborate, but Sarah Chen remained silent. He had interviewed thousands of soldiers over his career and had developed a sense for when someone was hiding something significant. With her, it wasn't that she was being deceptive, everything she said was carefully truthful. But there were clearly vast areas of experience she wasn't discussing. "That's specialized equipment," he observed, nodding toward the CheyTac case. "Not standard issue for most units." "No, sir. I was trained on various systems depending on mission requirements." Again, the careful truth that revealed nothing. General Richardson was becoming more intrigued by the minute. In his experience, snipers fell into two categories: those who treated it as a technical challenge, focusing on the mechanical aspects of precision shooting, and those for whom it had become something more personal. Sarah Chen clearly fell into the latter category, but there was a controlled intensity about her that suggested experiences he couldn't quite place. As they walked back toward the main facility, the general noticed other details about her behavior. She automatically positioned herself to maintain visibility of potential approaches. Her pace was measured, conserving energy while maintaining alertness. When other soldiers approached or vehicles moved nearby, her attention shifted briefly to assess and categorize the potential threat level before returning to their conversation. These weren't conscious behaviors, they were the ingrained habits of someone who had operated in environments where constant vigilance was necessary for survival. The general had seen similar patterns in soldiers returning from extended combat deployments, but there was something different about Sarah Chen's level of awareness. "I'd like to review your training records," he said as they reached the administrative building. "Of course, sir. Though I should mention that some of the details may be classified above standard review levels." This was the first hint she had given that her background involved more than routine military service. The general made a mental note to contact his intelligence contacts later that day. If Saracen had been involved in classified operations, there would be people who could provide more context about her capabilities and background. As they parted ways, General Richardson found himself with more questions than answers. The shooting display had been remarkable, but it was Saracen herself that lingered in his thoughts. There was something about her that suggested depths of experience and capability that went far beyond what appeared in her official file. That evening, as he reviewed the day's activities in his office, the general pulled Saracen's personnel file and studied it more carefully. The basic information was there: age, education, service record, but the details were frustratingly sparse. Her previous assignments were listed in vague terms: overseas operation, classified deployment, special assignment. The commendations were impressive but equally nonspecific. What caught his attention were the dates. According to her file, Saracen had been continuously deployed overseas for nearly 3 years, with only brief returns to the United States for equipment and briefings. 3 years was an unusually long period for continuous deployment, especially for someone in her specialty field. It suggested either exceptional circumstances or exceptional capabilities. The phone call he made to his contact in military intelligence was brief but enlightening. After providing Saracen's service number and current assignment, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "General, I'm going to need to call you back on a secure line," came the response. "Give me 30 minutes. When the return call came, it was from a number General Richardson didn't recognize, and the conversation was unlike any he had experienced in his 25-year military career. "Saracen is on loan to us from a joint task force that doesn't officially exist," his contact explained. "Her real service record is sealed at levels that require presidential authorization to access. What I can tell you is that she has been involved in operations that have prevented several international incidents from escalating into larger conflicts." The general absorbed this information quietly. "And her sniper capabilities are documented to be among the finest in the world? She holds records for longest confirmed kill shots in 3 different theaters of operation. But, General, her presence at your facility isn't coincidental. We have intelligence suggesting that her unique skills may be needed for a situation that's developing rapidly." As the call ended, General Richardson realized that his quiet training base was about to become something much more significant. Saracen wasn't there for routine training or rehabilitation. She was being positioned for something that required her extraordinary capabilities. The question was what kind of situation would require a sniper of her apparent skill level, and why the operation needed to be conducted with such secrecy. The next morning would bring answers he wasn't expecting, and challenges that would test not only Saracen's remarkable abilities but also his own understanding of what modern warfare truly demanded. The encrypted briefing arrived at General Richardson's desk at 0430, 3 hours before his usual start time. The urgent classification and multiple security clearance requirements told him immediately that the previous day's speculation about Saracen's presence had been accurate. As he read through the intelligence summary, the scope of the developing situation became clear, and, with it, the reason for deploying someone with her specific capabilities. A high-value terrorist target, known by the codename Architect, had been tracked to a compound in a mountainous region along the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. The individual was responsible for coordinating attacks that had killed hundreds of civilians across multiple countries. Traditional military approaches had failed repeatedly due to the terrain, the civilian population in surrounding areas, and the target's sophisticated early warning networks. What made this situation unique was the intelligence regarding the Architect's planned departure. Intercepts suggested he would be leaving the compound within the next 72 hours, traveling to a location where traditional capture or elimination would be impossible. This represented what intelligence analysts believed would be the final opportunity to neutralize him for the foreseeable future. The challenge was the distance. The compound was situated on a mountainside, surrounded by terrain that made close approach impossible. The nearest position from which military forces could operate safely was over 4 kilometers away. At that range, environmental factors made accurate shooting nearly impossible for conventional snipers. Wind conditions varied dramatically at different altitudes, temperature differences created complex atmospheric distortions, and the thin air at high altitude affected bullet trajectory in ways that were difficult to predict. General Richardson understood now why Sarah Chen had been positioned at his facility. Her documented capabilities suggested she was one of perhaps a dozen individuals in the world with the skill necessary to successfully engage a target at such extreme range. But understanding her purpose and feeling comfortable with the mission were two different things. At the morning briefing, Sarah Chen sat quietly as intelligence officers outlined the target, the terrain, and the tactical challenges. Her expression remained neutral, but General Richardson noticed she was taking careful notes about altitude changes, prevailing wind patterns, and seasonal weather variations. She asked precise technical questions about atmospheric conditions, sightlines, and potential shooting positions that demonstrated an understanding of extreme long-range shooting that went far beyond what he had observed at the training range. The shot distance will be approximately 4,200 meters, the intelligence officer concluded. Environmental conditions will be challenging, but weather forecasts suggest a window of relative stability in 48 hours. For the first time since the briefing began, Sarah Chen looked up from her notes. What's the confidence level on the target identification at that range? Reconnaissance photos and thermal imaging will provide confirmation. The target follows predictable patterns during his morning routine, appearing on a specific balcony for approximately 10 minutes each day. She nodded and returned to her notes. General Richardson was struck by the matter-of-fact way she was approaching what would be one of the most technically challenging shots in military history. There was no doubt in her demeanor, no suggestion that the distance or conditions presented unusual difficulties. It was as if she was planning for a routine training exercise rather than an operation that would require her to push the absolute limits of what was possible with current technology. After the briefing, General Richardson requested a private meeting with Sarah Chen. They walked to his office in silence, both understanding that the conversation they were about to have would determine whether the mission proceeded as planned. 4,200 meters, the general said as they settled into chairs. I need to understand if this is within your capabilities or if we're asking you to attempt something impossible. Sarah Chen was quiet for a long moment, her eyes focused on something beyond the office window. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that hadn't been present in their previous conversations. I've made successful shots at that distance before, sir. The conditions in this case are challenging but not unprecedented. The greater concern is the political implications if the shot fails or if collateral damage occurs. Tell me about your experience at those ranges. She hesitated, clearly weighing how much information to share. There have been 3 documented occasions where I engaged targets beyond 4,000 meters. 2 were successful eliminations of high-value targets. The third was a successful shot that prevented a terrorist attack on a civilian population center. The general absorbed this information. 3 shots at distances that represented the absolute edge of what was technically possible, with apparently perfect success rate. What was the longest? 4,600 meters. Mountain environment, high altitude, variable wind conditions. The target was eliminated with a single shot. The casualness with which she described what would have been a world record-setting shot was unsettling. General Richardson realized he was dealing with someone whose capabilities existed in a realm he had never encountered before. How do you prepare for something like that? Environmental analysis is critical. Wind speed and direction at multiple altitudes, temperature variations, air density calculations. The ballistic computer can provide baseline calculations, but human judgment is necessary to account for variables the computer can't measure. She paused, then continued with what seemed like reluctant honesty. At those distances, you're not just shooting at a target. You're predicting where the target will be based on behavioral patterns, compensating for environmental factors that change during the bullet's flight time, and calculating trajectory modifications that require understanding physics in ways that most people never consider. How long does the bullet take to reach the target at 4,000 meters? Approximately 6 seconds, depending on atmospheric conditions. During those 6 seconds, wind conditions can change, the target can move, and atmospheric distortions can alter the bullet's path. Success requires predicting all of those variables simultaneously. General Richardson was beginning to understand the complexity of what Sarah Chen routinely accomplished. It wasn't simply a matter of superior marksmanship, it was a combination of technical knowledge, environmental awareness, and predictive ability that bordered on the impossible. "I need to ask about the psychological aspect," he said carefully. "Taking a life at that distance, knowing that success prevents potential mass casualties but failure could have significant strategic implications." For the first time, Sarah Chen's composed demeanor showed a crack. She was quiet for nearly a minute before responding. "Every shot I take is calculated to save more lives than it takes. The individuals I've engaged have been directly responsible for planning or executing attacks on civilian populations. The psychological weight is significant, but it's balanced by the knowledge that failure would result in far greater loss of life." She looked directly at him then, and General Richardson saw something in her eyes that helped him understand the complexity of her previous commander's reactions to her. There was complete professional competence, but also a burden that came from repeatedly making life-and-death decisions under impossible circumstances. "Sir, I need you to understand that this isn't something I do lightly. Every long-range engagement I've conducted has been preceded by extensive intelligence verification. I've never taken a shot without absolute certainty regarding target identification and the broader strategic implications." The general nodded. "What do you need to prepare for this mission?" "Access to detailed topographical data, hourly weather reports for the target area, and time to handload ammunition specifically for the environmental conditions we'll encounter. I'll also need to spend time with the CheyTac system, ensuring it's properly calibrated for extreme range shooting." Over the following 24 hours, General Richardson watched Sarah Chen transform from a mysterious soldier with impressive skills into something approaching a force of nature. Her preparation was methodical and comprehensive, covering every conceivable variable that might affect the shot. She spent hours studying satellite imagery, calculating sightlines, and identifying the optimal shooting position. The ballistic computer worked constantly, running scenarios for different environmental conditions and ammunition types. She handloaded 50 rounds of ammunition, each one precisely calibrated for the expected atmospheric conditions at the target location. Most impressive was her work with the CheyTac rifle system. She field-stripped the weapon completely, inspected every component, and rebuilt it to specifications that exceeded factory standards. The scope was mounted with precision that required specialized equipment, and the entire system was tested and adjusted with mechanical tolerances that approached perfection. "The rifle is only as accurate as the ammunition and the shooter's ability to read conditions," she explained as she worked. "At extreme ranges, a tiny variation in any component can result in a complete miss. Every element has to be optimized for the specific conditions we'll encounter." General Richardson observed that her preparation went beyond technical requirements. She was studying the target's behavioral patterns, memorizing movement routines and timing. She analyzed the terrain around the compound, identifying factors that might affect the target's movements on the day of the mission. "Human behavior is the most unpredictable variable," she said when he asked about this aspect of her preparation. "But most people follow patterns, especially in familiar environments. Understanding those patterns allows me to predict where the target will be at specific times." The evening before deployment, Sarah Chen requested a private meeting. They walked to the outdoor range where this unusual situation had begun, the desert evening providing a quiet backdrop for a conversation that felt more personal than professional. "General, I need you to understand something about extreme long-range shooting," she began. "At the distances we're discussing, success isn't guaranteed regardless of skill level or preparation. There are simply too many variables that can't be completely controlled." She paused, looking out across the darkening desert. "I've been successful in previous operations because I've been conservative in my target selection and extremely thorough in my preparation. But there's always an element of uncertainty that can't be eliminated." General Richardson appreciated her honesty. "What's your assessment of this mission's success probability?" 70%, assuming environmental conditions match the forecast and the target follows established behavioral patterns. That's higher than most missions at this range, but it's not a guarantee. "And if the shot fails?" "The target will be alerted to our presence and will likely disappear for months or years. The strategic opportunity will be lost, and future operations will be significantly more difficult." They walked back toward the main facility in comfortable silence, both understanding that the next day would test not only Sarah Chen's extraordinary abilities but also the limits of what military precision could accomplish under real-world conditions. The general found himself hoping that her confidence was justified, while simultaneously preparing for the possibility that even exceptional skill might not be sufficient for the challenges they were about to face. As they reached the building, Sarah Chen stopped and turned back toward the range. "Sir, tomorrow will either validate years of training and preparation, or it will remind us that some targets exist beyond the reach of conventional military capabilities. Either way, we'll know definitively what's possible." General Richardson nodded, recognizing that he was about to witness something that would either represent a remarkable success or a demonstration of the limits of human capability under impossible circumstances. The helicopter lifted off from the base at 0300 hours, carrying Sarah Chen, her equipment, and a small support team toward the mountainous terrain where the most challenging shot of her career awaited. General Richardson had insisted on accompanying the mission, partly for operational oversight but mostly because he needed to witness firsthand what his mysterious sniper was truly capable of accomplishing. The flight took 2 hours, following a route that avoided populated areas and potential detection. As they approached the target region, the terrain below became increasingly rugged, with steep valleys and peaks that created complex wind patterns and atmospheric conditions. Through his night vision equipment, General Richardson could see why conventional approaches had failed repeatedly. The landscape was a natural fortress, providing countless defensive advantages while offering very few opportunities for attacking forces. The landing zone was a narrow plateau approximately 6 kilometers from the target compound, hidden from direct observation but providing the sightlines necessary for extreme long-range shooting. As the helicopter departed, leaving only the sound of wind across stone, the team began establishing their position in what would be a temporary base for the next 18 hours. Sarah Chen worked with mechanical precision, setting up her shooting position with attention to details that demonstrated the accumulated wisdom of countless similar operations. The location was chosen not just for its sightlines but for factors that most people would never consider: protection from shifting wind patterns, stable ground that wouldn't vibrate from nearby movement, and natural camouflage that would prevent detection from the target area. The CheyTac rifle system was assembled with ceremonial care, each component checked and rechecked before being locked into place. The scope mounting required precision alignment that took nearly an hour to complete, with adjustments measured in fractions of degrees. When finished, the system represented the absolute peak of current long-range shooting technology, optimized specifically for the environmental conditions they would encounter. Target verification will begin at 0600, the intelligence officer reported through encrypted communications. Thermal imaging confirms the individual is present in the compound and following established routines. General Richardson watched Sarah Chen as she received this information. Her demeanor remained calm, but he noticed subtle changes in her behavior that suggested the psychological preparation that preceded extreme-stakes shooting. Her breathing became more controlled, her movements more economical, and her attention more focused on environmental factors that would affect the shot. "Wind conditions are variable between our position and the target," she reported after studying the meteorological data. "We have consistent patterns at our altitude, but there are thermal effects in the valley that will create unpredictable air movement at intermediate ranges." This was the challenge that made the shot technically remarkable. A bullet traveling 4,200 meters would pass through multiple atmospheric zones, each with different wind speeds, temperatures, and air densities. Predicting how these factors would affect the projectile's flight path required understanding physics in ways that bordered on intuitive rather than calculated. As dawn approached, Sarah Chen began her final preparations. The ammunition she had hand-loaded was carefully inspected, with each round weighed and measured to ensure consistency. The rifle was bore-sighted and test-fired at a practice target 800 meters away, confirming that all systems were functioning within specifications. But General Richardson understood that success would depend on factors that couldn't be tested or verified until the moment of truth. "Target has appeared on the scheduled balcony," came the report from reconnaissance teams monitoring the compound. "Behavioral pattern is consistent with previous observations. Window of opportunity will open in approximately 30 minutes." Sarah Chen settled behind the CheyTac system, beginning the process of reading environmental conditions and calculating the hundreds of variables that would determine success or failure. Through his spotting scope, General Richardson could see the target area clearly, a small balcony on a building that appeared impossibly distant even through high magnification optics. The complexity of what Sarah Chen was attempting became clear as he watched her work. She was monitoring wind flags positioned at various distances, calculating temperature variations between their position and the target, and factoring in atmospheric pressure changes that would affect the bullet's trajectory. But, beyond the technical calculations, she was also studying the human element, observing the target's movement patterns and predicting behavior that would determine precise timing. Distance to target is 4,212 meters, she reported quietly. Wind conditions are stable at our position, variable at intermediate ranges, approximately 8 kilometers per hour from the northwest at target location. She made minute adjustments to her scope, compensations so small they would be invisible to anyone not familiar with extreme precision shooting. The crosshairs were positioned not on where the target currently stood, but where her calculations suggested he would be when the bullet completed its 6-second journey. General Richardson found himself holding his breath as the moment approached. Through his spotting scope, he could see the target moving in what appeared to be a predictable pattern, unaware that his actions were being observed and analyzed from a distance that would have been considered impossible just a generation earlier. Target is in position, Sarah Chen reported. Environmental conditions are within acceptable parameters. Taking the shot in 10 seconds. The silence on the mountain became absolute. Even the wind seemed to pause as if nature itself understood the significance of what was about to happen. Sarah Chen's breathing slowed to an almost meditative rhythm, her body becoming completely still behind the massive rifle system. General Richardson watched through the spotting scope as she made her final microscopic adjustments. At this distance, a variation of mere millimeters in rifle position would translate to missing the target by several meters. Everything had to be perfect: the rifle, the ammunition, the environmental calculations, and the human element of reading conditions and predicting behavior. The CheyTac barked with a sound like thunder, the massive cartridge launching a precisely machined bullet on a trajectory that would either represent triumph or failure in approximately 6 seconds. The rifle recoiled against Sarah Chen's shoulder, but she maintained her position behind the scope, tracking the target area through the optics. 6 seconds seemed to last forever. General Richardson found himself calculating the bullet's progress in his mind: 1 second, passing through the first thermal layer; 3 seconds, crossing the valley where wind patterns were most complex; 5 seconds, climbing toward the target altitude where atmospheric density would affect the final trajectory. Through the spotting scope, he saw the target's movement stop with sudden finality. There was no dramatic falling or obvious indication of impact, just an immediate cessation of movement that suggested the bullet had found its mark with precision that defied comprehension. Target down, came the confirmation from reconnaissance teams. Clean hit, target eliminated. Mission successful. The words seemed inadequate for what had just been accomplished. Sarah Chen had successfully engaged a target at a distance that represented the absolute edge of what was technically possible, under environmental conditions that would have made the shot impossible for virtually any other shooter in the world. But, as General Richardson watched her reaction, he realized that success brought no celebration or relief. She continued to monitor the target area through her scope, systematically checking for any signs of activity that might suggest the operation had been detected. Her professionalism remained absolute even in the moment of remarkable achievement. Confirm target elimination and begin withdrawal procedures, she reported calmly. No secondary activity observed at the target location. The extraction process was as methodical as everything else Sarah Chen did. The rifle system was disassembled and secured, ammunition accounted for, and the shooting position cleaned of any trace that might reveal what had occurred. Within 30 minutes, all evidence of their presence had been eliminated. As they waited for helicopter extraction, General Richardson finally understood what made Sarah Chen unique among military professionals. It wasn't simply her technical shooting ability, though that was extraordinary. It was her capacity to maintain absolute professionalism under conditions that would overwhelm most people, combined with an understanding of the strategic implications that went far beyond the mechanical act of firing a rifle. "How do you process something like that?" he asked as they waited in the pre-dawn darkness. Every successful shot prevents potential future casualties, she replied quietly. The individual we eliminated today was responsible for coordinating attacks that would have killed hundreds of innocent people. The mathematics are straightforward, one life taken to save many others. Her response was logical, but General Richardson could see the psychological weight she carried. Making life and death decisions at impossible distances, under conditions where failure could have strategic implications, required a level of responsibility that few people could bear. The helicopter arrived as the sun began to rise over the mountains, casting long shadows across the terrain where they had just witnessed something that would be remembered as one of the most remarkable achievements in military precision shooting. As they lifted off, General Richardson looked back at the shooting position, already invisible in the morning light. During the flight back to base, he found himself studying Sarah Chen with new understanding. She had demonstrated capabilities that existed at the very edge of human possibility, but the cost of possessing such skills was evident in the controlled intensity she maintained constantly. She lived with the knowledge that her abilities made her responsible for situations where others would be helpless. "What happens next?" General Richardson asked as they approached their home base. "I return to training and preparation," Sarah Chen replied. "There will be other situations that require these capabilities, and the margins for error remain the same regardless of previous success." As they landed, General Richardson realized that he had witnessed something that would change his understanding of what modern warfare demanded. Sarah Chen represented a level of precision and capability that existed in a realm he had never encountered before. But, more than that, she embodied the psychological strength necessary to bear the responsibility that came with such extraordinary abilities. The mission had been successful, but it had also revealed the complex human cost of pushing military capabilities to their absolute limits. Sarah Chen could accomplish shots that seemed impossible, but the burden of repeatedly making life and death decisions under such circumstances was visible in every aspect of her demeanor. As they walked back toward the base facilities, General Richardson understood that he had not simply observed remarkable marksmanship. He had witnessed the convergence of technology, human skill, and psychological strength that represented the cutting edge of modern military capability. The question that remained was whether the strategic advantages justified asking individuals to bear such extraordinary responsibilities. 3 weeks after returning from the mountain operation, General Richardson sat in his office reviewing after-action reports and trying to process the implications of what he had witnessed. The successful elimination of the architect had prevented a coordinated series of attacks planned for major population centers across 3 countries. Intelligence estimates suggested that Sarah Chen's single shot had potentially saved thousands of lives, but the broader questions about capability and cost remained unresolved. Sarah Chen had returned to her routine training schedule as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Each morning, she appeared at the shooting range with the same methodical precision, working with various rifle systems and consistently demonstrating capabilities that exceeded anything General Richardson had previously encountered. But he noticed subtle changes in how other personnel interacted with her. Word of the mountain mission had spread despite classification restrictions, and there was now a mixture of respect and unease in how people regarded her. The breakthrough in understanding came when General Richardson received clearance to review Sarah Chen's complete service record. The classified files revealed a career that read like a catalog of impossible achievements and strategic victories that had shaped international security for the past several years. Each operation had pushed the boundaries of what precision shooting could accomplish under real-world conditions. Her first documented extreme-range engagement had occurred 2 years earlier in Syria, where she had eliminated a chemical weapons coordinator from a distance of 3,800 meters. The shot had prevented the deployment of chemical agents against a civilian population and had been conducted under conditions that included sandstorm activity and extreme temperature variations. The success of that mission had established her reputation within classified military circles. The second major operation had taken place in Somalia, where she had provided overwatch protection for a hostage rescue mission. From a distance of 4,100 meters, she had eliminated 3 separate threats in a sequence that allowed rescue teams to extract captured aid workers without casualties. The precision required for multiple shots at that range, under time pressure, had been unprecedented in military history. But it was the third operation that helped General Richardson understand the true scope of Sarah Chen's capabilities and the psychological burden she carried. 6 months before her assignment to his base, she had been positioned in the mountains of Afghanistan with orders to prevent a terrorist leader from reaching a meeting that would have coordinated attacks across multiple continents. The target was moving in a vehicle convoy through terrain that made approach impossible. At a distance of 4,600 meters, a range that pushed beyond the theoretical limits of current rifle technology, Sarah Chen had successfully engaged the target vehicle with a shot that intelligence analysts later described as impossible. The elimination had disrupted a terrorist network that intelligence services had been tracking unsuccessfully for over 2 years. But the psychological impact on Sarah Chen had been significant. According to the mission reports, she had spent 3 days in position, calculating environmental factors and studying target movement patterns before taking the shot. The isolation, combined with the pressure of knowing that failure would result in mass casualties, had pushed her to what psychiatrists described as the edge of what was psychologically sustainable. The classified debriefing notes revealed the human cost of her extraordinary abilities. She had begun experiencing symptoms consistent with extreme stress, insomnia, hypervigilance, and difficulty processing emotions related to her role in life and death decisions. The recommendation had been for extended leave and psychological counseling, but emerging threat situations had made that impossible. General Richardson realized that Sarah Chen's assignment to his base had not been for routine training or rehabilitation. She was being prepared for what intelligence analysts believed would be an even more challenging mission, one that would require her unique capabilities under conditions that would test the absolute limits of human endurance and skill. The briefing arrived the following morning, carrying classifications that required presidential authorization to access. A new threat had emerged that combined the worst elements of previous situations: extreme distance, challenging environmental conditions, and strategic implications that could affect international stability for years to come. A terrorist organization had acquired nuclear materials and was developing a weapon that could contaminate major urban areas. The individual coordinating this development, known only by the codename Engineer, was operating from a facility in mountainous terrain that made conventional military approaches impossible. Intelligence suggested that the weapon would be completed within days, after which it would be transported to a target city where interdiction would be extremely difficult. The only viable option was elimination of the engineer before the weapon's completion. But the facility was positioned in terrain that would require a shot at distances approaching 5,000 meters, beyond anything that had been previously attempted under operational conditions. Environmental factors included altitude variations, unpredictable wind patterns, and atmospheric conditions that would challenge every aspect of extreme long-range shooting. General Richardson understood immediately why Sarah Chen was being prepared for this mission. She was quite possibly the only individual in the world with the combination of technical skill, psychological strength, and operational experience necessary to attempt such a shot. But he also understood that asking her to push even further beyond previous limits might exceed what was psychologically sustainable. When he called Sarah Chen to his office to discuss the emerging situation, he found her studying meteorological reports and ballistic calculations that suggested she already understood what was being asked of her. Her demeanor remained professionally composed, but he could see the weight of anticipated responsibility in her expression. "The shot parameters exceed anything we've attempted previously," she said without preamble. "Distance will be approximately 4,900 meters, with environmental conditions that will push beyond current predictive capabilities." General Richardson was struck by her matter-of-fact assessment of what would be a world record shot under impossible conditions. "Do you believe success is possible?" "Technically, yes. The rifle systems exist, the ballistic computers can provide baseline calculations, and the environmental monitoring equipment can measure most of the relevant factors. The limiting factors are human, my ability to process multiple variables simultaneously and maintain precision under extreme stress." She paused, looking directly at him with an honesty that had been absent from their previous conversations. "General, I need you to understand that this mission will push me beyond sustainable limits. The psychological preparation required, combined with the consequences of failure, will likely exceed what I can process without permanent effects. This was the first time Sarah Chen had directly acknowledged the psychological cost of her extraordinary capabilities. General Richardson realized he was facing a decision that would determine not only the success of a critical mission but also the future well-being of someone who had already sacrificed more than most people could bear. What would you need to prepare for this mission? Extended isolation for psychological preparation, access to advanced ballistic modeling systems, and complete environmental data for the target area. But, most importantly, I would need absolute assurance that this represents the only viable option for preventing the threat. Over the following days, General Richardson watched Sarah Chen begin preparations that went beyond anything he had previously observed. Her training routine intensified to a level that approached obsessive, with sessions that lasted from before dawn until late evening. She was pushing her physical and mental capabilities to extremes that seemed designed to simulate the stress she would encounter during the actual mission. The psychological preparation was the most concerning aspect of her routine. She had begun practicing meditation techniques that approached sensory deprivation, teaching herself to maintain focus under conditions of extreme stress and isolation. Her interactions with other personnel became minimal, as if she was deliberately separating herself from emotional connections that might affect her concentration. General Richardson found himself in the uncomfortable position of recognizing that Sarah Chen was transforming herself into something approaching a human precision instrument, optimized for a single purpose but potentially at the cost of everything else that made her human. The question was whether the strategic importance of the mission justified asking someone to make such sacrifices. The answer came when intelligence reports confirmed that the engineer's weapon development was ahead of schedule. The nuclear device would be completed within 72 hours, after which the window for prevention would close permanently. The stakes had escalated beyond theoretical strategic implications to immediate threat of mass casualties that could number in the hundreds of thousands. Sarah Chen received this information with the same professional composure she had maintained throughout their association, but General Richardson could see the final psychological preparations beginning. She was entering a mental state that would allow her to function under impossible conditions, but the cost was becoming visible in every aspect of her behavior. "I understand the implications," she said when presented with the updated timeline. "The mission will proceed as planned." That evening, as General Richardson watched her conduct final equipment checks and review environmental data one last time, he realized that he was witnessing something both remarkable and troubling. Sarah Chen had developed capabilities that existed at the very edge of human possibility, but the psychological cost of repeatedly pushing those limits was becoming unsustainable. The helicopter would arrive at 0300 the following morning, beginning what would either be the most remarkable achievement in military precision shooting or a demonstration that some challenges exceeded even extraordinary human capabilities. Either way, General Richardson understood that after the next mission, Sarah Chen would need support and recovery time that acknowledged the true cost of what had been asked of her. As she walked back to her quarters for final preparations, General Richardson made a decision that went beyond operational considerations. Regardless of the mission's outcome, he would ensure that Sarah Chen received the psychological support and recovery time necessary to process what she had experienced. Her extraordinary capabilities had served strategic interests at a personal cost that deserved recognition and care. The next morning would test the absolute limits of human precision and psychological endurance, but it would also mark the beginning of acknowledgement that even exceptional individuals deserved support for the burdens they carried in service of others' safety.